Since when are you drinking spiced tea?
Hello everyone, and welcome back for part 3 of why Andor is the best Star Wars has been since the original trilogy. In the previous 2 parts, we discussed episodes 1 and 2. So today in part 3, I will be continuing on with episode 3. Let's not waste any more time and just jump straight back into it. We begin with Cassian drifting through space. He is seemingly having some problems with his ship, although we don't know exactly what they are. He's tearing cords out of the walls of the ship, touching them together. These 2 particular cords, when they come into contact, send the TIE Avenger into a frenzy. That's all we get for now before we cut away, and we don't really have a whole lot of anything to unpack yet, so moving on. Cut to Mina Rao, and the locals have gathered for some sort of picnic or barbecue type of social gathering. We get a brief little snippet of B2 playing with some of the Mina Rao children. It's a nice little touch, which I think is worth mentioning considering B2 has heavily been put on the back burner for this season. He had a rather large role for a droid back in season 1, but for season 2, I don't think the writers really knew what to do with him, so they decided to slowly phase him out. Which is sad, because I liked him back in season 1 for sure. But considering the type of droid that he is, it would have been hard to constantly keep him around without it feeling like he was forced in there, without there being a logical reason for him to be there, especially considering the way the story unfolds in season 2. So I understand him not being more of a focus for this go-around. Anyways, the patrons of Mina Rao are having a good time, laughing, drinking, eating food, but when Brasso sees that Kellen has arrived, he excuses himself from the table, and the tone immediately shifts to more serious. Kellen's got bad news. He informs Brasso that he's found out that their block is next on the inspection schedule, which is a big concern, cause taking a risk on whether or not the Empire's gonna check for visas is a risk you'd obviously rather not take, since the repercussions of being discovered as an illegal migrant when you're talking about a force as evil of the Empire will likely be terrible for you. They might just have you executed just to get rid of you quick and simple. The best that Kellen was able to do under the circumstances was get them all emergency work orders, which may work if they're stopped on the way over to the 800 block, but the dates are wrong. So if the Imperials take more than a quick look at them, then they'll be screwed as well. But considering the options that they have, that's probably their best bet. We don't get an answer as to how exactly Kellen was able to acquire these emergency work order cards, but considering that the show has established him over the past 2 episodes as a clever individual who is able to get information out of people, I can infer that it was his clever nature that was able to get him these passes. So Kellen's coming up clutch once again. I really like Kellen actually. He's not a major player in the overarching story, but he does get a decent amount of character development for someone who you'd think is just supposed to be a supporting figure to the plot. Over the past 2 and some episodes now, we know a decent amount about some of his character traits, some of his skills, particularly that, as I just mentioned, of extracting valuable information. He quite honestly gets more development than Brasso or Willman in this first arc, which is a little strange considering that those 2 are supposed to be part of the main trio of this subplot. I don't think this would have stuck out to me that much if Kellen was more incorporated in the overall story down the line, but the fact that he is just in these 3 episodes and never shows up again does make me wonder if this was time well spent, regardless if I like him or not. I think they very easily could have had him make his way to Yavin a few years down the line. That way this episode wouldn't be the last that we see of him, but they don't, which I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity by the writers, especially when you consider that it's made very clear by Kellen's dialogue that he hates the Empire. Cut over to Chandrila, and it is the 3rd day of festivities, which means it is time for the wedding itself. Before the ceremony begins, Mon takes a moment with Lita where she ends up effectively pouring her heart out to her, trying to get her to change her mind and not go through with the wedding. She feels extreme guilt that she's had to put Lita through this and make Lita do this. It really feels like at this moment, Mon is telling Lita what she wishes she would have done herself all those years ago when she was arranged to marry Perrin. But Lita gives a snippy response, saying that she wishes she were drunk. In just a short sentence, it so effectively highlights the disconnect between these 2. Lita throughout the show has never shown much affection for her mother, even though Mon loves her very much. This line I saw as the icing on the cake, affirming what I already knew to be true. Mon tells her not to go through with this from a place of love and deep care about her well-being, and what she thinks is best for her. She's very young, and Mon thinks that she shouldn't have to get married yet. But Lita just doesn't seem to care about what Mon is trying to get through to her. You can tell that response stabbed Mon in the heart. She's going to have to marry off her daughter so young, and there's nothing she can do about it. And ironically, the daughter being married off, who didn't have a say in all this, wants it to happen. Mon's expression quickly turns from sadness into frustration, a face that conveys, alright, you know what? If you want to do this, then let's do it. It's your decision, and you're going to have to live with it. Mon walks Lita out into the ceremony, and the actual wedding itself begins. And I have to say, I was very impressed by the Chandrilan wedding ceremony that the writers came up with. It has an interesting blend of different types of ceremonies and rituals from cultures that you'd find here on Earth. But the fact that it's a mishmash of a bunch of different things helps it feel completely unique. The elegant costumes and the beautiful scenery make it feel very modern and high class, but also at the same time feels very tribalistic and has a more ritualistic, ceremonial type of feeling than something you generally associate with high-class modernism. So an interesting blend there, which I enjoyed seeing play out. Cut over to Coruscant. Sierra and Dedril are preparing for their dinner with this mysterious individual. Alright, we all know who it's going to be. Let's be for real. Cyril is very nervous, trying to make sure that everything is perfect. His chopping of the food is perfect. He makes sure his suit looks perfect. He even very slightly adjusts a fork to make sure it's perfectly straight. That made me laugh a little, not gonna lie. Dedra is choosing out her outfit while practicing her fake smile, before very quickly returning to her stone-cold face. This also made me laugh a little, because this brief bit of setup before the main parts of the scene start is playing into both her and Cyril's established characters so perfectly. Dedra and Cyril stand by the door nervously, patiently awaiting the doom that is to come. The doorbell rings, and in comes the nightmare of all forces, Cyril's mother. Immediately you start to get the sense of a power struggle going on between all the different personalities interacting with each other. Edie denies Dedra's attempt at a handshake. She scoffs at Cyril for attempting to leave to get her spiced tea. Edie already is being classic Edie, trying to establish herself as the dominant personality in the room. And Dedra, for these brief opening bits that we see between the two, is conducting herself cordially. I kinda took this first interaction as Dedra feeling Edie out, seeing exactly what she's working with here, before she feels comfortable going in on her and putting her in her place later in the episode. After this, we briefly cut over to Clea for a few minutes before we return back here, so I'll quickly go over that stuff with her and return here for the rest of the dinner scene, just so I can keep the continuity straight in my head. So Andor is finally able to get a signal through to Clea from the middle of nowhere in outer space. It's not exactly clear how long he's been flying around, or why he's waited till now to contact Clea, or if he's just now been able to get a signal. But I'll give the show a pass and just fill in the blanks since it's not that important to the plot. What is important though is Andor aggressively asks for a safe place to go. Clea says to give her a minute so she can find something, but Andor, who is reasonably very aggravated after all the shit he's been going through over the past 2 days, flippantly says that he's going to call home. Clea tells him not to do that cause it's very busy in that area right now, which gets Cassian very concerned and prompts him to rush off and fly home despite Clea telling him not to. Him just rushing off home and ignoring Clea like this is logically not a smart thing to do. He inevitably is going to conveniently show up at just the right time when his friends need saving, but he has no way of knowing exactly what is going on there since Clea is trying to speak in code. The only thing he can really infer is there is an Imperial presence there now, and him just rushing off to there at the slightest bit of concern just shows that he's got a lot of work to do on himself when it comes to following orders and playing his part in the system. This is a character flaw that he struggles with throughout the series, even as more and more time goes by. We see the same thing happen later down the line in Arc 4 when he deliberately disobeys orders and goes off on a mission of personal interest. That personal interest, of course, can be argued that it's in service towards the greater good, but the tough time that Andor has with fitting into a system, especially when he doesn't agree with certain decisions or the way things operate, is a character trait that Andor Season 2 leans into quite heavily. That aids, I think, pretty well in fleshing out Andor's character throughout the season. So back at dinner, Edie decides to give a brief sum-up of sorts to Dedra of Cyril's life and upbringing, and she does it in a little bit of an unflattering way, almost being a little condescending and demeaning, which you'd expect because that's the way that Edie has interacted with Cyril throughout the show's entirety so far. Cyril tries to get her to stop, but Edie just shuts him down and continues on. It's very clear that the power in that relationship between the two of them still very much lies with her. Edie is very intrigued by Dedra because it seems that Cyril has found someone that he can, as she puts it, actually communicate with. She wants to know Dedra's backstory, and Dedra's response to that question I think is very telling of why her character is the way she is, and how she's gotten to the places she's gotten. However, there is one piece of information which doesn't line up, and that of course is when she says that she grew up in an Imperial cinder block, which to the laws of Father Time is an impossibility. Dedra is clearly someone who is at least in her mid-30s at the youngest. Let's give a range of mid-30s to late 30s as a ballpark estimate. Well, since we are currently currently in the year BBY4, that means that the Empire is only about 15 to 16 years old at this point, which would mean that Dedra was likely around her early 20s when the Empire rose to power. So if she did grow up in a cinder block, then the right thing to say would be that she grew up in a Republic cinder block, because when she was 3 and first put in there, that would have happened before the events of even Episode 1. Now, in all fairness, maybe she recognized that it was a Republic cinder block, but is just referring to it as an Imperial cinder block, since that's what the former Republic was reorganized into, but you never know, that's not the way I took it on first go-around. And this struck me as a big goof by the writers that wasn't caught. Back on Minorau, Brasso, Willman, and Bix have begun to pack up their things and are going to be moving out soon. It seems like they're going to take up Kellen's offer of using emergency work orders, because they don't want to risk the Imperials having to turn a blind eye for themselves to get off the hook. Not much of substance happens yet though before the show cuts away, but we'll be back to Minorau shortly. Back to dinner once again, it feels like we never left. Edie plays with her dessert like a child, just to piss Cyril off even further. After a couple more snippy remarks, Cyril's done. He throws in the towel, exits the kitchen towards the bedroom, and now only Dedra and Edie remain. Dedra very quickly drops the nice facade and enters her Imperial supervisor mode of operation. She makes it very clear to Edie that going forward, that the amount of times that Cyril is going to come and visit her on the regular will be directly proportional to how much anxiety she generates in their lives. This little game of tough bitch Edie, yeah, we're done. It's time to play nice. This exchange is just so good. I think this may be, or at least for me, one of the most intimidating Dedra moments we've seen up to this point. And I think that has to do with the fact that she just so effortlessly just flips the switch and turns from good little housewife to the aggressive, you're gonna do what I say and you're going to like it kind of woman that she likes to be. And just like that, Edie gets the memo. She realizes that she no longer has the authority and power over Cyril that she once had. Cyril, lying face down in the bedroom, starts hearing strange remarks coming from the kitchen. Wait, is that mother complimenting me? Cyril looks a little confused as he re-enters the conversation, and Edie smiles at him in a way which I can best describe as, well, it looks like someone is holding a gun up to her head and telling her to smile, which is essentially what Dedra is doing from a metaphorical perspective. I know some people weren't the biggest fans of seeing a family dinner type of scene in a Star Wars show, but the character writing here is so strong and the acting is equally just as so, that this kind of proves to me that you can have any type of scene in a Star Wars setting and make it work as long as it's written well. If you asked me prior to seeing the show whether I thought a scene like this should have belonged in Star Wars, I probably would have said no, but hey, I have just been fully convinced to the contrary now. And that's actually exciting to think about for me, because that just means that there are more different avenues that you can tell a story, or write a scene in Star Wars which won't feel like it's too out of place, which ultimately means that writers can have more freedom when trying to write good stories. Cut back to Chandrila. Before the meat and potatoes of this scene between Mon and Tay take place, we get a nice little bit of world building for Chandrila that I'm always open for. World building, after all, of course, helps differentiate certain planets and cultures from each other and helps the audience get more interested and invested in the places the story is taking place in. So Luthen has helped supply Skolden with a very important statue that he is going to give as a wedding gift for Lita and Stekken. This statue is revealed to be an irreplaceable piece of Chandrilan artistic history, one of 12 Shandy Merles that were all lost when Chandrila was sacked by the Rakatans 25,000 years ago. Now, if you're a fan of the Star Wars EU, then this little line probably gave you goosebumps. For those of you who may not be aware, the Rakatans were an extremely historically significant race in ancient Star Wars history. They were a humanoid amphibious species that ruled over the galaxy with a great degree of force. So I love and greatly appreciate how the writers decided to throw that little Easter egg in there for the really hardcore Star Wars fans. It's a small detail, but it just shows that they care. Moving on, Tay strolls over to Mon to have one last little conversation before he leaves the party. He very interestingly is talking quite fondly about Skolden, saying that they're together quite often. Now this is quite concerning to Mon because she does not like him whatsoever, as characterized back in Season 1. What I have inferred based off this dialogue is that Skolden over the past year has crept deeper and deeper into Tay's head. He probably planted the seed of, you know, she really should be paying you back in some way for helping her with all of her troubles. Because if you really wanted to, you could screw everything up for her. Although we don't know for sure that that's what happened off screen, that's my best guess. It seems like he's about to say one more thing before he departs from the party, and he notably pauses for a good while, but decides just to simply say, Sagrona Tima. I guess at that moment he felt that he's revealed enough cards for now, and will wait till the meeting next week with her before he says anything else. Something which will never happen, because Luthen watches on, and he will ensure that that man will never see another sunrise. He has too much leverage over the rebellion to be ignored, and his intentions are hostile, so he needs to die. We quickly cut over to Mina Rao before returning back to the wedding. So an Imperial ship flies by as Brasso and Bix say goodbye to B. This prompts Brasso to suggest that they should leave now, even if they initially were planning to leave at nightfall. Brasso's spidey senses are tingling, and he thinks that they could be in danger very soon. And he'd be correct, cause here they come. So Brasso and Bix want to leave now, but Willman isn't there at the moment cause he went to say goodbye to Bila. Brasso gets concerned and speeds off on a speeder to go and find him, and get him to come back so they can get the fuck out of here before it's too late. But little does he know, they're already too late. So shit's about to go down when we return here. Back at the wedding, Luthen has pulled Mon aside to have an urgent conversation about the Tay situation. Luthen knows that this situation truly can't be ignored any longer. Tay has been following Skolden around all weekend. Something has to be done right here and now. But Mon once again tries to de-escalate the situation by saying that, we'll find a number. I have a meeting with him next week, don't worry. But Luthen responds to that by basically implying that the number doesn't matter. He'll have leverage over you forever, and we have to get rid of this issue now. When Mon says that she doesn't know what he's trying to say, Luthen then simply says, how nice for you. Which I find really telling. Even though she doesn't say it, I think she knows exactly what he means. She just doesn't want to believe it. She doesn't want to believe that someone that she has known her whole life would betray her in such a way. Luthen saying this just highlights just how much Mon is kind of naive to how things really get done. Luthen is ordering this man's death sentence, and his soldiers will be the ones to actually wipe Tay off the playing board. But people like Mon never really have to see the grim things up close. So I think it's hard for her in this moment to come to grips with the harsh reality of the situation, and what things have to be done if her problems truly want to be solved. So moving on, for the rest of the episode, the show is constantly jumping around from scene to scene in such short amounts of time, and I think it would be a little jarring if I keep doing that myself. So I think to make it a little more smooth, for the rest of the episode, I'm going to tackle the subjects in blocks. So we'll start with the sexual assault scene, then the Brasso stuff, then Andor section, and finish off with the remainder of the wedding stuff. So Bix is in a hurry, fiddling with the radio, and is almost able to get through to Cassian, who is currently above the planet. But right as she was able to make her way through to him, here comes the return of everybody's favorite Imperial, Lieutenant Kroll. That's a joke, guys. That's a joke. So last time we saw Kroll, I predicted that it was a little too strange of an encounter and it lingered a little too long for it to be a one-off occurrence. And I think most people assumed that he would return at some point. And we were right, because he has once again returned to annoy Bix. And with her being alone this time, the situation is looking really bad for her. As Kroll makes his way inside and walks around the interior, the tension is really starting to rise, because the longer the scene goes on, it's becoming more and more obvious that Kroll is going to demand sexual favors from Bix. And for doing that, he might overlook the fact that she is an illegal. Bix denies, of course, and what proceeds is Lieutenant Kroll attempting to rape her. I don't feel the need to go into much detail, cause we've all seen the scene, and it's not pretty to watch. But this scene in particular, I remember the first week the arc dropped, took over almost the entirety of the conversation surrounding the first 3 episodes. On one end, you had people who were completely fine with it, because their justification was, of course stuff like this would be present throughout the galaxy, why are people complaining about it? And on the other end, you had really big names like Star Wars Theory boycotting the show and deciding not to continue to watch it. So yeah, it was a pretty heated situation for sure. But what are my thoughts on it? Am I cool with it? Am I not? Do I think stuff like this belongs in Star Wars? Well, I've heard both sides of the argument, and I think that there are definitely some strong cases to be had on both sides. But I think that, yes, it belongs in Star Wars. I don't see why it wouldn't. However, I think that the creators should depict more serious subject matters like this sparingly, and have to be very carefully intentional when they decide to depict it. Let me explain. So, of course, rape and sexual assault happen in the Star Wars universe. This is a galaxy filled with evil galactic empires, gangsters, and a plethora of other morally evil characters. To think that stuff like that wouldn't happen is just straight up naive. But I think the majority isn't arguing about whether it happens or not, but rather whether it should be shown. And And to that I'd say, I really think it depends on a project-to-project basis. When I was watching the episode for the first time and this scene happened, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really think much of it, in the sense that it didn't stick out or feel out of place to me because Andor is a very mature show. However, if this scene happened in a show like Skeleton Crew, yeah, that would feel fucking weird and really out of place, because the established tone of that show was much more lighthearted and family-friendly. Andor has a much more dark and gritty tone to it than Star Wars is generally accustomed to feeling like. I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad for Star Wars, but it's just the reality in this instance. And you can absolutely have different tones for Star Wars. I think that different tones can work well for different stories. You can even see it in the movies. I'd argue that Episode 4 has a much lighter tone than Episode 3, and that comes about just based on the stories that each of those respective films are telling. Episode 4 is centered around our new scrappy bunch of characters on an adventure, while Episode 3 is much darker because it depicts the fall of Anakin Skywalker to the dark side, and the fall of the Jedi Order and the Republic. So back to my original point of if it fits the tone, it's fine. In this specific instance, I'm fine with it, because that's the type of show that Andor is. I certainly don't think that has to be the normal, but for the extremely dark and very grounded and gritty Star Wars stories, I think it's fine to show stuff like this. But that's my 2 cents on the matter. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments below, cause I'm interested to hear more opinions about it. So moving on, let's move on to Brasso. So Brasso was found sneaking around in the fields by a stormtrooper and is now being brought in for interrogation. Upon reaching the hut area, one of the Imperial officers asks Kellen to confirm his identity, and Brasso realizes the situation very quickly. He's screwed, there's no way he's getting out of this. But he can at least try to spare Kellen, so very cleverly, he makes it sound as if Kellen aided in helping the Imperials discover his true identity. He gets all pissed at him saying, "I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna kill you!" And he does it so convincingly, in fact, that at first I actually thought that's what he believed. But just a few seconds later, with the slightest facial expressions from the both of them, you're able to infer that Brasso is in fact playing an act. And Kellen, very subtly, you can tell, acknowledges what he's doing. Very good acting here, I must point out. When Cassian returns and all the Imperials are momentarily distracted by the TIE, Brasso decides to make a run for his speeder with the hopes of escaping. And he's almost able to get away, but is sadly shot down by one of the stormtroopers, which ends up killing him. I'm kinda disappointed that they decided to kill him off like this. I didn't really see much of a reason to. I think the foundation for his character was very strong and could have served well in some of the later arcs as a rebel, especially in arcs 3 and 4 when the group is settled on Yavin. I think that the journey his character was on was clearly headed in the direction of being a full-blown rebel. Maybe working for Luthen, maybe not, but a rebel nonetheless. But they decided to end it here for him. And yes, I understand that you have to kill some characters now and again to keep the stakes up, because if characters that we care about never die, then we're never really going to be worried for their safety, because we have no reason to assume that anything bad is going to happen to them. But I don't know, I felt killing him off like this felt pretty useless. They could have found a much more impactful way to kill him off if they really wanted to. And hey, if you really wanted to kill him off in this arc, I wouldn't prefer it personally, but you can make it work and have it be meaningful. Maybe it comes in the form of him sacrificing himself in some way, shape, or form so that Cassian, Bix, and Willman can escape. That would have been so much more emotionally impactful and so much more of a satisfying death. And yes, I get it. In reality, not every death is going to be satisfying, like some death going out in a blaze of glory. But to just kill him off by some random stormtrooper in a field, wasn't a big fan. It left a lot to be desired. Moving on to Andor. So Cassian has arrived on Mina Rao after disobeying Clea, telling him not to earlier in the episode. He has arrived in just the nick of time because our crew down on the surface need him now more than ever. And what follows is the action set piece that we all felt like was coming. Cassian bolts down to the surface, and with the capabilities of the TIE Avenger, and there seemingly being not that much Imperial firepower to retaliate, all they really have is foot soldiers and some transports with some mounted guns on them, Cassian is able to swiftly and easily defeat the Imperials in the immediate area. It's a simple action set piece, but very entertaining still nonetheless. Getting to see more of the TIE Avenger in action, of course, is a welcome addition, and really helps bring some of that explosive energy that a lot of people look for in Star Wars. Since admittedly, it has been a while at this point since there has been any big action scenes. Considering how it felt like the Mina Rao subplot was building up to some sort of confrontation all along, especially by the end of episode 2, when Cassian had escaped and the situation on Mina Rao really started to escalate, this scene most certainly felt earned and wasn't just thrown in there just because it had been too long without laser lasers. Cassian drops the TIE Avenger and finds a dead Brasso laying in the fields off to the side of his bike. And this is really sad, not gonna lie. Besides the fact that he's dead, of course, and I know Brasso wasn't a major character across the past 2 seasons, but I really felt like the show could have gotten more out of him before killing him off. I won't dwell on this too much since I just talked about Brasso, but I really feel like his character deserved better. There was so much more left to be desired. Cassian finally reunites with Bix, and I can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Not only considering what Bix just went through, but also the hell that Cassian has gone through these past couple of days. It's honestly pretty incredible that they've both made it back to each other in one piece, cause one of them very easily could have died. More so Bix, cause we all know Cassian survives this, of course. Cassian, Bix, and Willman fly off into the sky and have managed to survive this run-in with the Imperials. But although they have survived, it does very much so feel like more of a loss, because they lost one of their closest companions, who they've lived with not just this past year on Mina Rao, but also stretching back to living in the same community on Ferrix for probably their entire lives. So yeah, this one probably hits really deep for them because he was almost like family. To round off this episode, let us return to Chandrila to finish off the events of the wedding. After Mon ends her conversation with Luthen, all she proceeds to do for the next 15 minutes of the episode is down a bunch of shots and dance to Star Wars disco. I know some people weren't the biggest fans of this section, saying that it felt too similar to something you'd see here on Earth. I can understand that complaint. I myself was pretty indifferent to it. I thought it was fine and didn't really take me out of the experience. But yeah, I can agree that they very easily could have jazzed it up to make it feel somewhat more Star Wars-y, make it feel more alien, like something you'd never see here on Earth. My bigger takeaway though is I think there's a little bit of meaning behind how Mon is just letting loose so wildly on the dance floor. She's had so much emotionally damaging shit happen to her this weekend, from discovering that Tay has betrayed her and is essentially forcing Luthen's hand to kill him, a situation that has her really upset, as well as having to marry off her daughter for the sake of the rebellion, although she absolutely did not want to. I saw this as her physically trying to deal with all of those emotions, just letting loose in an almost animalistic way and how wild she's moving. The other huge thing of note here at the end of the episode is the setup for Tay's assassination. Tay has returned to his cab, and instead of it being his usual driver, it's Cinta who has been called in by Luthen in such quick fashion. Cinta very naturally plays off that she was called in to fill in, when Tay asks where his normal driver is. Tay gets into the cab, and Cinta drives him off to his death. Although we never actually see the assassination happen, we have been given all the clues necessary to infer that Luthen has now successfully been wiped off the board by Tay, and he has avoided what could have been an extremely big problem if left unresolved. There's also a brief little run-in with Cinta and Vel. They never actually speak to each other, but they do make eye contact. And considering that they're secret lovers and haven't seen each other for a very long time, this is emotionally traumatizing to see each other for the both of them. Particularly Vel. Cinta is keeping a straight face because she's on duty at the moment, although we can only assume what thoughts are running through her mind. But we do get a shot of Vel laying down by herself up against a wall in a dark hallway, visibly upset. So yeah, she is not doing too well. And with that wraps up episode 3. When taking a look at the first arc as a whole, upon second rewatch, I think this is definitely the best out of the opening 3 episodes, and I think it's pretty clear why. Getting Andor out of that stupid rebel subplot was a breath of fresh air. And yes, it's a little disappointing perhaps that he isn't in this episode all that much, but the little that he has is quality and very important to the story, so I'm able to give it a pass. The Mina Rao plotline finally gets some payoff after 2 episodes of pretty subpar buildup in my opinion. Overall, the Mina Rao section didn't really add that much of value to the season, but there were a couple of noteworthy things that happened to some of our characters, so I can't say that it was entirely useless. The Chandrila plotline is once again very intriguing, similar to episode 2. There is a little more of non-consequential type of scenes to the overarching narrative of the season in this episode, like the wedding ceremony and all of the dancing, but the more essential takeaways and scenes from this plotline are once again very well constructed and have major implications for our characters and the season to come. And finally, the Imperial stuff with Dedra, Cyril, and Edie I very much enjoyed, just due to how well constructed the character writing and dynamics are throughout the episode. Despite the scenes themselves being more mundane in nature and in plot points, they are very much essential, I think, in portraying the dynamic of the relationship between Dedra and Cyril, because they lay the foundation for how certain elements of the story play out in arcs 2 and 3. All in all, I'm going to give episode 3 a 6.5 out of 10. pretty good. And with that, that just about does it for Arc 1. If you've made it this far, then as always, thank you for taking the time to listen to some of my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, then do me a favor by leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot, so any support would be greatly appreciated. If you have any of your own thoughts on Episode 3 or Arc 1 as a whole, now that I think about it, or maybe it's just about Andor Season 2 in general, then feel free to take to the comments below, cause I'm always interested to hear your guys' thoughts. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I'll see you guys in the next one.